Rashid Shaheed, yeah, he's just going to pop for these ceiling games. Does a little bit better against man coverage. It was a man-heavy matchup last week. Really good deep threat. Oh, you want a hot take from me? I think Rashid Shaheed is a more talented player than Xavier Worthy. I feel really good. No, I'm serious. I feel really good about it. And you know who agrees with me on this? Brett Whitefield. I double checked with him. He feels the same way. The dude is fast. He can't track a deep ball. Rashid Shaheed is fast. Can track a deep ball. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Week 6 fantasy football preview, talking about risers, talking about fallers. School of Scott fantasy football podcast. Theo Greminger and Scott Barrett here each and every week on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network and on Fantasy Points YouTube. Scott, we got to talk about it. Your Exodia quarterback, Drake Maye, had a huge primetime matchup against Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. New England goes in and wins. The game was really, really a fun one, but the story for fantasy was Stefon Diggs. Diggs looks completely rejuvenated. Back-to-back 100-yard games for Diggs. It's been nearly 2 years since he was able to accomplish this. Happened back in 2023. And this is the first time that a New England Patriot wide receiver has back-to-back 100-yard games since Julian Edelman in 2019. Wow. Is Stefon Diggs for real right now?
Yeah, I think so. I think, well, right now, that's a crazy stat, by the way. Thank you for that. He's one of only 3 wide receivers averaging over 3 yards per route run. And you have seen volume, usage, utilization, route share pick back up over the last 2 weeks, which I think makes sense. The first 3 weeks of the season, they didn't maybe fully trust him coming off of ACL surgery. You wanted to, had a little ramp up. And so, yeah, I'm buying into this because one, Drake Maye is just balling out. He's almost too good. Like, I knew he would take a big step forward, but he's almost too big. He just beat the Bills and he didn't even have to run. He's not really running. But yeah, he's playing at a borderline MVP level. So if you have those MVP bets, those are looking great. Ranks top 3 in every accuracy metric. Insane consistency week to week, regardless of opponent. Bills are a really tough matchup for any quarterback or any pass catcher. And then, so Drake Maye is doing really well. And there's not a lot of target competition outside of Stefon Diggs. No other Patriots wide receiver ranks top 50 in ass. And then I think we just underrated Stefon Diggs. Everyone's like, oh, he's washed. But the Patriots paid him a lot of money, like as though he were a non-washed number 1 wide receiver. And the dude, he's finished top 16 in fantasy points per game in 9 straight seasons. So yeah, I'm really bullish. I think this is real. A lot of other people don't think this is real. So he might be a buy low, if he keeps this trajectory up. You're the resident, trade guy. I just got one in DMs, AJ Brown or Stefon Diggs. And maybe this is anchoring bias because I know redraft. Maybe there's an anchoring bias just because where the discrepancy in ADP was to start the season, you would take that, wouldn't you?
Oh, I mean, to start the year, you'd sort of laugh at it. But when you factor in where things are now, and just a quick shout out to our amazing team behind the scenes at Fantasy Points Data and Brett Whitefield, Stefon Diggs over the last 2 weeks has a 44% first read rate. He has I believe it was a 39.6% target share and a 54.5% air yard share. So you're talking about next level statistics over the last 2 weeks with Diggs. Let me ask you this, Scott. Who has a better offense right now, the New England Patriots or the Philadelphia Eagles?
Yeah, for sure. The Patriots.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's things change very rapidly. I think that the argument against Diggs would be him sort of breaking down, but he's sort of a medical miracle at this point with just how quickly he was able to come back. Diggs looks completely locked in. This game seemed to really, really matter to him. And even last year in a very different role where he was in that sort of low ADOT role in Houston. He was still giving us like 15 points per game. So I'm not underestimating Stefon Diggs at all. Whereas AJ Brown, things just don't look good. He scored 9.5 points this past week, which in years past would sort of make you sick as an AJ Brown manager. This was his second highest scoring game of the season. So things are just not right in Philadelphia right now. So I think that's an interesting one. I would think that in most leagues you'd be able to squeeze out a little bit more because I don't think people are necessarily as get out of dodge on AJ Brown as I might be feeling right now. So yeah, it's a new day for sure. Your thoughts on Drake Maye? We didn't really even put him on the show sheet, but again, not his biggest statistical performance. But what does that mean for a quarterback like him to go into Buffalo, go head to head against Josh Allen? He made some very, very big plays. The final drive, he was fantastic. Just your thoughts of the overall vibe and his sort of trajectory right now after that huge win.
Yeah, I mean, it looks amazing. You just digging into the advanced metrics, he's playing at arguably the highest level in football. Sam Darnold too, by the way, another one of those sneaky, might be in the MVP conversation, or at least based on the analytics. You look at the offensive line, which is bottom 10. You look at the receiving core, which is not great outside of Stefon Diggs and Hunter Henry. And he's top 3 in every accuracy metric there is. Top 3 in adjusted net yards per attempt. It's almost like he's so good it's hurting him for fantasy, where he only had the one loss. He ran 7 times for 45 yards in that game, but the other games he's only really running when he's near the end zone. And so he was my Exodia fantasy quarterback. Maybe I should have just had MVP bets on him and made Justin Fields the Exodia quarterback. But while we're talking about New England, I want to ask you about a player where things are not looking so good, and that is TreVeyon Henderson. The other running backs, I said this, I reluctantly, or I don't know, I eventually talked myself into him, but I said multiple times I wouldn't be surprised if Ramondre Stevenson easily led this backfield in touches, but my God, it is so much worse than I even thought possible, where Ramondre has 3 fumbles, Antonio Gibson has 2 fumbles, and Henderson nevertheless is still the RB3. After the game, Mike Vrabel asked about it. He's like, yeah, well, maybe we'll get him more involved in special teams. And yeah, yikes. How do you draft this guy as high as you do and barely play him?
Well, I think we have sort of an out here where the usage for Ramondre doesn't seem to be disappearing. It's almost a Sean McVay-like with Kyren Williams last year, where we thought maybe the Kyren Williams fumbles might open up opportunities for other players. It seems like with Ramondre, they're just like, okay, he fumbles a little bit, but we seem to like him. The thing with TreVeyon, though, is we now have like an olive branch that's been extended. Whether Mike Vrabel wants to use him or not, you now have the Antonio Gibson injury. So this is going to have to ramp up TreVeyon Henderson. I don't think that it's sustainable to put the Gibson touches and usage onto Stevenson, who's already at a pretty high usage rate. I think that Henderson is going to have to be more involved, whether the Patriots want to or not. I don't know what it is when it comes to Henderson. He looked so good in the preseason. A lot of really, 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 really smart people and some sharp money was in on Henderson. He's been one of the worst picks you could have made in fantasy, where some people are going to say, hey, Scott, Theo, I don't know if you know this, but Henderson was like a 5th round pick in my league. We're okay. But in some of the higher stakes leagues, he steamed up to the 2-3 turn where people are really betting on that talent. So locked in his 3rd rounder in NFFC, FFPC. A lot of people are left holding the bag there. But I do think the Gibson injury opens some things up. Wouldn't you think that those Gibson touches and usage would go to TreVeyon Henderson? Just my gut feel.
I think best case scenario is you're hoping for, rookie season Jahmyr Gibbs. But right now it looks like there are like 7 rookie running backs I'd rather roster in fantasy. It's pretty awful.
Yes, I would agree on that. I would say that the class as a whole is just ridiculously good right now. And I would say that
And you know what we need to talk about too is, so I gave Quinshon Judkins a lot of grief just because digging into the numbers, it looked awful. Like PFF said, he was getting, sub 35th percentile yards after contact per attempt in every single college season. And if that's the case, like we've never seen a running back hit, but now we're watching him on film, and our film charters, shout out Swalls, are saying he looks like, I comped him to Nick Chubb or Nick Chubb light. He was saying, dare I say Adrian Peterson is what he kind of looks like. He is playing at an unbelievable level. And he out-touched TreVeyon Henderson. Henderson, the more efficient back, but I mean, who looks like the more valuable fantasy asset right now? Who looks like the better running back right now? It's not even close.
I think that the conversation really should turn to Quinshon Judkins versus, I don't even want to say it, Ashton Jeanty, Omarion Hampton. Quinshon Judkins, every time. So, not to sound like too over the top or simplistic, but every time that Quinshon Judkins touches the ball, it's a grown-ass man run, and a grown-ass man run with explosion and vision. Like, it's sort of an it factor when it comes to Judkins. And I think we've talked about it on multiple pods where they're giving him the ball in such a high volume, no matter what the game situation is. They force-fed him touches in that Baltimore game almost to ramp him up. Scott, I said the other day that I think that Quinshon Judkins is going to be in the discussion at this rate. When we get to the summer, he's going to be in the discussion for the 2026 first round in redraft, because the situation in Cleveland is only going to get better. It can't possibly get worse. He's surrounded by this youth movement, and it's just the eye test. And also, the stats don't really tell the full truth from this past week, because he had a couple of big plays that were called back on penalty. So I think Judkins is fantastic. And I will add, just for the record, I was much higher on Quinshon Judkins than you this summer. I know Brett Whitefield was as well. So we weren't collectively all down on Quinshon Judkins. And Scott, this is another one where, yes, there were some advanced metrics that were anti-Judkins, but unbelievable combine, off the charts athleticism, and he is the second all-time best freshman season in the history of the SEC conference, behind only a guy named Herschel Walker. And he was able to put up huge stats in the two best leagues in college football, the Big Ten and the SEC, and was good in his 1 year at Ohio State, and was very good in the college football playoffs. So Judkins, really, really a good one. The rookie running back class is sort of what was promised. I would say that Hampton, I don't even want to talk about the Chargers running back situation, because I've literally talked about it on 5 podcasts. But Hampton was trending up so well. We have him on a number of teams that we share. The pass catching looked fantastic. Now we've got this stint to the IR, but we would say that Hampton is a major win. Scadaboo's a major win. Jeanty, we've seen a ceiling game, and Jeanty looks good. He's I think a little bit handcuffed by the quality of the Vegas offense right now. I think we would both say that one. It's been a huge win for a bunch of these rookie running backs. So TreVeyon Henderson being the 6th or 7th best one at the end of the year, that might still put him on the RB2 line. Make sure you are subscribed to Fantasy Points. Use the code Theo and get 15% off any Fantasy Points subscription. You're going to get access to the Everything Report, written by Scott Barrett, also with Ryan Heath. That's where we get almost everything for this podcast from, along with Fantasy Points Data Suite, where you're going to get access to the best source of analytics and statistics available anywhere. The code Theo will get you 15% off of any single Fantasy Point subscription. So maybe you started out the year 2 and 3, maybe you're 1 and 4. We can be the bailout that you need. All of our amazing rankings, our amazing tools, all of my articles, all of Scott's articles. We're going deep at Fantasy Points, and we're going to help you win. Scott, speaking of winning, it just feels like in fantasy, there's not usually this many offenses where you're sick to your stomach having to access players from. It's really bad this year. It feels like it just has this feel to it that there's a lot of really bad offenses. What does the data say about this?
Yeah, the data absolutely agrees with you. This is true from a real life football perspective. Right now, there are 9 teams with a point differential of 7.0 per game or worse. Last year, 6, the year before that, 5, the year before that, 3. That's sort of the trend. There's a lack of parity. There are some, we knew some of these teams would be bad, and they're just like so much worse. And there's like a few more teams that we didn't expect, like the Ravens, who are just absolutely awful. And so, like, what can we point our figure at in terms of being the problem? And I think offensive line play is a major issue. Right now, there are 7 offensive lines allowing pressure on at least 42% of their dropbacks. There was 0 last year. And then I think quarterbacks are also to blame. There's a lot of bad quarterback play. There are 7 offenses generating 132 or fewer catchable air yards per game. It was just 2 last year. Obviously, that's horrible for the receivers. Really hard to, be a productive fantasy asset with so few catchable air yards. And so, like, one of my little things, note to self, reminder for next year, is maybe just like severely dock and penalize any players on a team with a bottom 12 offensive line, because you look at those teams, the 9 teams with the outlierishly low point differential. 5 of those teams were teams that Scott DiBenedetto, who was a scout with the Browns, now he's our offensive line guru, identified preseason as being among the 12 worst offensive lines in football. 3 more teams starting a backup quarterback, and then the 9th team is the Saints, who we all knew was going to be absolutely awful. And then there's this trickle down effect for fantasy where it's like, yeah, there is no one viable on the Titans. And then there's Derrick Henry, Chase Brown, T. Higgins, Ashton Jeanty, these talented players who are all really struggling. And then this is just from the offensive level. You look at the defense level. Theo, who's the best quarterback in fantasy?
Well, I saw this, that you put out a very, very dank tweet on X, and it was, it's actually whoever is going up against the Dallas Cowboys defense is the best quarterback in fantasy right now.
Yeah, and second best is whoever's up against the Ravens. Third best is whoever's up against the Dolphins, and then it's Josh Allen. And the same thing's true among the running backs. There are just some absolutely god-awful defenses. And so, yeah, things are chaotic. Things are weird. Things are crazy. And so you could take this one of 2 ways. You could say things, this is going to change. Like we can't bank on this sticking. There's always like seasons within seasons, and the injury plagued Ravens defense is going to get healthier. The awful, Giants offensive line is going to, come together and, game plan and, different things like that. I don't know. I kind of think things could get worse, just because I think you see the Ravens already trading players. I think you could see the Saints trading assets. I think, the Jets might start spending more time looking at their draft position rather than their upcoming opponents. I say embrace the chaos. This is something you do probably better than most as a high stakes player. Treat your roster more like a DFS lineup. Attack matchups. Lean into the Ravens defense being generationally bad. And then just be reactive, just be quick to change as the NFL changes. Work the waiver wire. I mean, just look at last week, right? Rico freaking Dowdle, 200 rushing yards. Jacorey Croskey-Merritt, Rachaad White, Michael Carter, all cracking the top 10 running backs. And so, yeah, it's chaotic, but embrace the chaos.
Yeah, I love that you talked about the DFS mentality. I think this is a great way of sort of merging the two games, where DFS managers are able to take a very limited sample size and make the best possible outcome with their lineup in a very short-term game. We have essentially a 14-week game followed up by a 3-week game for most fantasy managers. Of course, there's leagues that are a little different, Scott, like FFPC. You got to navigate this, and this. It's a 2-week playoff, whatever. But fantasy football is really a long-term sport, but it's a weekly game, and each week matters. You bring up the running backs, and I think that a great point you made in the Everything Report, certainly we're going to talk about Rico Dowdle shortly, but Rico Dowdle I talked about this in my waiver wire column over at Fantasy Points, how when you see a Rico Dowdle, a Michael Carter happening the week after Kenneth Gainwell, not only is it sort of rejuvenating to the fantasy manager who might be feeling the grind a little bit of going through waivers each and every week, it's inspiring almost because players get an opportunity, players can shine. It's a weekly sport, not only at the running back position. Darren Waller over the last 2 weeks, a guy who was not on our radars to start out the season except as like an 18th round best ball pick. No, you're a huge best ball bro, Scott. I'm sure you have some bags of 18th round Darren Waller. No, I have a couple of bags, but Darren Waller, unbelievable. We'll talk about him shortly. And then even from a wide receiver perspective, things happen and all of a sudden you get Kendrick Bourne in your lineup. You use him as a spot start like a DFS manager might when you get a guy at a dirt cheap price tag. You put him in there and Kendrick Bourne would have potentially been a guy who would have broke the slate in DFS if it was playing on Sunday. So I love looking at it from a weekly lens. I know we talk to Abib Agbatoba, one of the best high stakes players around, in sort of a chat, and how we're all sort of a little bit excited by the chaos because it makes, I know certainly for content, there's more for us to talk about. Each week
well, it's
seems
also
to
our
change.
builds on these teams we built together. A lot of these teams we went intentionally weak at RB2. And a lot of these teams we have Rico Dowdle. We have, some of these running backs who are popping.
Yeah, exactly. And punting RB2 this year, and again, we don't want to write the entire story of the fantasy season, but you mentioned TreVeyon Henderson. Certainly now Omarion Hampton is banged up. You're going to miss him for, let's call it 4 weeks. Then you add in the Seattle situation where Kenneth Walker was going in that range. There was really a sort of a cluster of running backs who we might look back at the end of the season and say that this, certainly Chase Brown, when he was going in that range, has been a colossal bust. He ended up rising up by the end of the summer, but we might end up being able to identify a dead zone where there were fewer hits than misses, and pretty by a decent margin. Whereas if you went with the hero RB build this year, you could have ended up with a Bijan Robinson, a Christian McCaffrey type, and then, like you said, embrace the chaos, end up with guys like Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins, and then all these backup running backs, or guys drafted like backup running backs, guys that are hitting like Scattaboo. So always interesting to look back and see what draft strategy worked. But yeah, really some interesting takeaways. Make sure you read the Everything Report. Scott goes way more expansive in that one. And I also thought the other thing that you talked about was some of these offenses are just dead with the air yards. You talked about the offensive line play, really went deep with that one. Another player that you talked about at length, and this has sort of been a hot button player on X, a hot button player in just everyone's minds, is Emeka Egbuka. Unbelievable what he's been able to do. Another smash week from him. He has a season high in scoring. That Tampa Bay Seattle game was just fantasy gold, a 38-35 shootout. And you walk away from it, it was the battle of the Ohio State wide receivers. And Egbuka ends up out-dueling Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who was also just awesome in this one. Baker Mayfield versus Sam Darnold. So many games within the game for this one. With Egbuka, is there any argument right now to selling high on the 20.5 points per game? And I'll bring up just one sort of Debbie Downer comment here. Before Mike Evans went down, he did have a higher first read rate than Egbuka. I think that could change. But is there an argument here, Scott, from a game theory perspective to trying to flip Egbuka?
Yeah, I think from a dynasty perspective that you could for sure do that. Our separation metrics are pretty critical of Egbuka. I think part of that is he keeps winning in zone and he's getting open. He's just not beating cornerbacks with separation. You really see that in against man coverage. He ranks like 137th in yards per route run against man, but he's top 5 against zone. And yeah, he is benefiting from the injury to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin probably might not be 100% until much later in the year. And so, yeah, if you can get Tet McMillan, who I think is a more talented player, plus a little bit extra, I think that's a great move. But from a redraft perspective, no, you're not doing that. There are all these injuries to these Buccaneers receivers. Egbuka looks incredible. He's scoring touchdowns. We led off last week's Everything Report talking about why this year is a little unique. You want to place greater emphasis on the touchdown scores. Baker Mayfield's elite. Like, I don't care. I have a bias towards guys like Scadaboo and Baker who are fun. But I think even if you factor that in, he's amazing. And he's awesome for his receivers. Has a ton of trust in Egbuka. This is an aggressive pass heavy offense. I think he's an easy low end fantasy wide receiver one moving forward. I mean, if you can get JSN for him or Amon-Ra for him, I'd make that trade, but I don't see anyone doing that.
Yeah, and I don't know about the Tet McMillan, Emeka Egbuka. I know in my personal wide receiver ranks, so we do things a little differently with our dynasty ranks, where you can get access to the overall rankings, but you can also see individual positional rankings from Ryan Heath, myself, John Hansen, Thomas Tipple. I moved Egbuka ahead of Tetairoa McMillan, and I did that like 2 weeks ago. So I'm sort of in there with Egbuka being sort of on a special track. I think when it comes down to it for Dynasty, if you're going to flip Egbuka in Dynasty, and I'll talk about this a little bit on Dynasty Life this week, I think you need to be aiming for Malik Neighbors, because if you're flipping Emeka Egbuka, you're not a win now situation, Scott. Emeka Egbuka managers, if you're in win now, just hold them. But if you're somewhere in the middle, if you're a rebuild, make an offer to the Malik Neighbors team, because that team is going to look at it as a reasonable pivot. And if I'm going to move off of Egbuka, it better be a player that can be the wide receiver one overall at some point. And that's sort of with Egbuka. Is he a wide receiver one overall type? I think he can be because of Baker Mayfield, the power of Baker Mayfield. And maybe he's a Justin Jefferson that we sort of were not as excited about him in the draft process as we should have been. But I think more likely than not, he's a guy that has a bunch of wide receiver one seasons without necessarily hitting that top end, Jamar Chase-like ceiling. So I would be aiming for a Malik Neighbors if I was going to consider moving him. I think you can get Tetairoa McMillan and a first from some managers right now. That's how hot the Egbuka market is right now in Dynasty. He's literally a guy you cannot access. And there's a lot of other content creators out there, Scott, who I've seen put out there, if we were redrafting this rookie class in a Dynasty rookie draft, a lot of them are putting Emeka Egbuka at the 101 ahead of any of the running backs, ahead of any of the quarterbacks. He's a rocket ship to the moon right now in all formats.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you certainly have your finger on the pulse of the Dynasty streets better than I do. I'd rather Jeanty straight up still, but maybe I criticize you. I say you're too reactive or too reactionary.
Yeah,
but maybe I'm
too quick to the trigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's a nice balance there.
I'll look great. I think I'll look great in 2027 if I traded Egbuka for Jeanty, but who knows?
Yeah, I think with the argument I would make to you is which one of them could be a 101 in redraft, and it's Ashton Jeanty. So yeah, I think I'm sort of with you. I'm sort of with you on that one. Scott, Rico Dowdle, we got some Rico Dowdle bags. We got, I think, 2 Rico Dowdle bags together. One with a bead.
We could have had 5, Theo. Not to.
We could have had a lot. We could have had a lot.
You were telling me about Trevor Etienne. I don't know. I didn't hear his name.
I did. Listen, I still like Trevor Etienne. He was in my waiver wire report because I think that the Dowdle explosion speaks volumes to the quality of what a Dave Canales offense can do for a running back. I think we can both agree on that one. Dave Canales has been a running back.
Trevor Etienne's not going to have a 200-yard rushing game. I'll tell you that.
No,
ever
he's
in
not.
his career. Yeah.
No, he's not. But he could have Trevor Etienne if he gets the backfield ever. I don't want to talk about Trevor Etienne, but I can make some arguments.
You did when we were drafting our main events, though. I
absolutely did.
So for the folks at home, not to give Theo too much of a hard time, I know I come off as such a total dickhead right now, but yeah, we did a number of main events, and I think every single time, in like round 15, I'd pounded the table for Rico Dowdle, and I'll lay out the argument here. It's so Danny Kelly of The Ringer I think is the best running back evaluator I know. Just his hit rate is crazy. And he was like the world's biggest Rico Dowdle guy coming out. So I've had Rico Dowdle on every single one of my dynasty teams for 6 years. The first 3 years Dowdle was in the league, he had like 4 total touches because he kept getting hurt. And he was on my team the whole time. So I've had this bias towards thinking this guy could be something. And I for sure think he's a better pass catcher than Chuba. One of my favorite stats last from the offseason that no one cared about but me was Chuba Hubbard had the worst yards per target in NFL history of like 3,000 qualifiers. So I think Dowdle's a better pass catcher. And I think Dowdle like could be as good of a runner, if not better, just because like look how awful the Cowboys were without Dak Prescott last year. Dowdle had over 100 rushing yards in 4 of his last 6 games. And then it's the role and it's the offense. We know Dave Canales covets a versatile running back who can be used at a high level in both facets of the game. That was more Dowdle to me than Hubbard because, again, worst yards per target ever. And whoever that running back is going to get a valuable role in the offense. Dave Canales's running backs. So last year, Hubbard, week 3 on, top 7 running back by fantasy points per game. Rachaad White, I think week 7 on, top 5 fantasy points per game. Both running backs cleared a 75% snap share last 2 years. Only 6 other running backs accomplished the same feat. So valuable usage, valuable role, underrated player. If this sounds persuasive at all to you, maybe you could try and trade him, blow your fab budget, depending on how soft your league is. Wasn't persuasive at all to Theo, unfortunately. He gave me so much grief during the draft.
We have so many bags of so the Trevor Etienne, just to go a little bit into the Trevor Etienne argument. Trevor Etienne's a guy I think the organization likes. And Trevor Etienne, they took him in the 4th round, Scott. They took him in pretty close to
special teamer. They like him on special teams.
Pretty close to Cam Scadaboo, pretty close to Bashal Tootin.
Oh, don't you dare.
Pretty good. So, but the argument with Dowdle is, and I've talked about this, I had a chance to podcast with Sigmund Bloom this week, go on the couch. I had Matt Waldman on Fantasy Football Daily on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network. So I've dove into Rico Dowdle with a bunch of people, and also we've been DMing about him. What's interesting with Dowdle is now it's like the fallout, where I said on my takeaways show on Fantasy Football Daily, you don't usually see guys pulling a 200-yard game sort of out of nowhere and then disappearing into the ether. One guy gets in the comments and he's like LOLing at me, and he names Jay Ajayi, Thomas Rawls, and Isaiah Crowell.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, okay,
and
guys.
Jonas Gray.
Yeah, the Jonas Gray game was unbelievable. But Thomas Rawls, the same year that he had the 200-yard game, had 170 yards. Jay Ajayi, I think, had 2 years of fantasy viability. One, correct me if I'm wrong there. I believe that Jay Ajayi was a 2-year guy. We're not going to dive into rabbit hole those guys, but thinking that Dowdle's just going to disappear, he's also got the perfect coach for this one, where Chuba Hubbard is by all accounts a Dave Canales guy. He had his ascension under Canales. Canales, when asked about everything by separate reporters, I've really dove into it this week. He's still saying just the positivity, and now he's saying things like, I have 2 really, really good backs. So I think we could end up seeing some sort of a committee. Could it be a 60-40 with Dowdle versus Hubbard? Does Chuba Hubbard feel the pressure to get back on the field a little bit quicker because of the success of the back behind him? So all these factors sort of go on in my head. But what's interesting when it gets to Canales is Chuba Hubbard, entering Canales' first year, was drafted as the RB2 on that team because they had just given a big contract to Miles Sanders.
Right.
Miles Sanders, of course, dealt with some injuries, but there was no pressure from Canales or the front office on, hey, let's keep this guy as the RB1. In fact, they went and they just put Chuba Hubbard in. Then Chuba Hubbard has a good season and they still draft Jonathan Brooks. Then, so this guy, it's been a situation where Carolina is going to play the person who gives them the best chance to win at the running back spot. We've seen what the ceiling outcome looks like with Dowdle. We can both agree that the top-notch ceiling outcome for Dowdle and even though it was Miami, it was a soft opponent.
Yeah.
It's better than what a ceiling for Hubbard looked like. I'll also throw out with Canales, early on in his tenure, he benches the number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young, to put in Andy Dalton. So he's shown a tendency to just play the guy he wants to play. Yeah.
For my Tet
Yeah,
McMillan
that would be
shares.
good. For Tet McMillan. Yeah,
Yeah.
Andy Dalton with Tet McMillan would be pretty good.
But yeah, I think that was the Barry lead. Dude, like 206 rushing, like that's a crazy impressive feat. Chuba Hubbard's career high is 153. And Hubbard this year has really struggled. I thought 0 explosive runs, 0 missed tackles forced. That's crazy. Rico Dowdle forced 10 missed tackles just last week, right? So it's like, I think it's a committee once Hubbard's back. But like I said, Canales favors ideally one guy. So I'm hoping he could be a bell cow and a league winner.
Yeah, and speaking of league winners, Jacorey Croskey-Merritt, 18th round shares in best ball, 4th, 5th round shares in dynasty are looking pretty good. And Scott, even the drafters who were drafting him in like the 10th, 11th round during the ascension are feeling really good about their JCM bags. Big breakout week for Jacory Croskey-Merritt. We saw Dan Quinn asked about this situation heading into the game. Quinn and Kingsbury sort of both talked about the hot hand, using multiple backs. It was a lie, a complete lie. We see Jaden Daniels back on the field, big important game on the road in LA, and JCM dominates the touches here. He has 2 touchdown runs, averaged a very, very high yards per carry, but was also impressive was 2 catches for 39 yards. This was the full Jacory Croskey-Merritt experience. Are we looking at him as a potential high-end RB2 moving forward, or should we temper the expectations a little bit? Certainly he has the juice, and playing next to a mobile quarterback like Jaden Daniels gives him the potential for big, wide rushing lanes, the chance for long runs. I'm excited. Where are you at?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a good chance he's this year's Bucky Irving, but I don't think he has Bucky Irving's upside. I think mid-range RB2 to high-end RB2 is maybe a ceiling. I think he's going to go nuclear this week against the Bears, but my concern with him is still, I don't see him being heavily involved in the passing game. Maybe there's some Jaden Daniels vultures, but because of the hyper mobility of a Daniels, that's a cheat code for the running back, and he looks great. I think we get hyper efficiency on the ground from him. And that is what you're seeing in the numbers. He leads all running backs in percentage of carries, gaining 5 yards. Looks like a way more talented player than I was giving him credit for, although you were on that before anyone else. So like this is a player I would be super geeked up to have on my teams, but I don't know that he has RB1 upside personally.
Yeah, I think that when we're looking at these sort of like out of nowhere, guys who come out of nowhere and end up having huge fantasy impacts, sort of when we look at the late day 3 or undrafted free agent bucket of running backs, I think that he's not going to quite be the Alfred Morris level. Alfred Morris was in a similar situation in Washington when they were the Redskins. He finished as a high-end RB1. I don't think that's going to happen. I think I found the good one, though. I think it's Philip Lindsay, part 2. Philip Lindsay averaged 14.9 points per game, finished as the RB13 in points per game, 14.9 points per game.
Wow.
He was an undrafted free agent. I think that's it. I think it's about where we're going to see JCM. I think the next Philip Lindsay, for anybody who enjoyed the Philip Lindsay waiver wire pickup back in 2018, big shout out to the old heads in the School of Scott audience there. But what do you think about that one, Scott? That's a good one.
I like that. I think he's a more talented player than Lindsay, or maybe he has a little bit more upside. But yeah, that's a good one. That's another player too who, what happened with Bill supposedly is like things out of his control, where he played one game and then the NCAA said he like wasn't allowed to play any more games, and I think that hurt his draft stock. And he was a small school guy before that. Philip Lindsay had a bunch of record-breaking numbers in college. And, based on my model stuff, he was always sort of popping as a player who should have been drafted much earlier than he was.
Yeah, it was Royce Freeman and Philip Lindsay too, and he ended up sort of passing. That was a wild year, fun one back in 2018. Let's stay on the running back track. Your thoughts on what we saw from Breece Hall in the first game without Braylon Allen?
Yeah, extremely encouraged. And he's playing at a really high level this year. Um, Ryan and I had this sort of conspiracy theory that he was like secretly hurt all of last year, because the year before he was looked incredible, was breaking off these long runs at will despite stack boxes and a dysfunctional passing game. And then last year, there was none of that. And our film charters, week 2, week 3, were like, he doesn't look like the same guy. It looks like he lost a step. And that was there the whole year. There were some, we did our investigative deep dive. There were some quotes where he like talked about being hurt in July and all, but like there was nothing substantial. And then this year, yeah, he's leading all running backs in percentage of carries, getting 20 plus yards, 25 plus yards. Braylon Allen was really the focal point inside the red zone. There's none of that now. And so now he's looking like a bell cow for a running back who over the last few years, you dig into the numbers, it's on par with like only the Le'Veon Bells of the world, the Matt Fortes of the world, 200 plus carries and 75 plus targets in back-to-back seasons. And now it's looking like he's going to do the exact same thing again.
Yeah, I'm really into Breece Hall right now. I think that he's very, very interesting. He's had back-to-back very, very strong weeks with yards per carry. But what's also really important for him is we've seen 3 straight weeks where he's had at least 4 receptions. The Jets are a train wreck. That's the one thing that sort of concerns me about Hall is the Jets are just sort of a train wreck as a team. And the teams that are losing, even if the offense is sort of fine for fantasy, craziness can happen. I do think there's also a non-zero chance that the drum beats are going to get louder and louder, that Breece Hall might end up being a player that's moved from New York when we get close to the trade deadline. He's not extended, and he's playing well. I think the market for him would be really high. And Scott, you've also got to figure that there's going to be, unfortunately, we've been talking about major injuries every single week. There could be a few more running backs that go down, and there's going to be some contending teams looking at Hall as either a replacement or an upgrade for them. So I'm really into Breece Hall. If you can acquire him in pretty much any format, I think he's a great player to acquire. I think that there's going to be also a very strong market for him in free agency this summer if you're a dynasty manager. I'd liken his situation to kind of like Tony Pollard's when Tony Pollard signed with Tennessee, and he did so in like the first 2 hours of free agency. I think there's going to be a market for Hall, but I think there could also be a market at the trade deadline. So make sure you're rostering Isaiah Davis as a handcuff. Not only is he Hall's handcuff, but you might end up getting a full-on Isaiah Davis two-way mini bell cow usage if they do move on from Hall because of the Braylon Allen getting injured. Scott, I didn't have a Cincinnati Bengals Cleveland Browns trade sort of on my bingo card. It was very shocking to see. We had sort of thought there could be a quarterback addition in Cincinnati with just how bad Jake Browning has been. Jake Browning and the Bengals actually had a pretty good sigh of relief type game for Jamar Chase this past week. Browning ends up with 3 touchdown passes, but of course, all of the interceptions yet again. Cincinnati was trailing like 28-3 in that game, came back and made it a little less ugly. And of course, Jamar Chase managers, you got the 2 touchdown game and you're feeling pretty decent. Joe Flacco's got to be an upgrade from what we saw with Jake Browning, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't know. This actually doesn't excite me. I actually don't think this is particularly interesting. I think you could say, oh, this is great just because it couldn't get any worse. And that is true. But I'm really not expecting too much of an improvement. Like, obviously, Jake Browning has been god awful. It has been so bad. It is like the worst level of quarterback play on the field right now. But I think that speaks more to Joe Burrow than anything else. I think Joe Burrow is really just him. And you're seeing like how elite he is behind an awful offensive line. which, I said earlier in this episode and in the everything report, like more and more, I'm thinking like offensive line in totality might matter more than quarterback play outside of like the 5 elites and like anyone who's just, backup caliber. And so, yeah, I think you put any quarterback in there. I don't think we see a substantial upgrade. Joe Flacco didn't show me anything to get excited about on the Browns. Not even on the Colts. Look at what Daniel Jones is doing versus what Joe Flacco did last year. Sure, it was an improvement on Anthony Richardson, and he was basically Tim Tebow 2.0. So yeah, I think this benefits Jamar Chase just because when you see a new quarterback come to town, or even a backup quarterback who doesn't have as many practice reps with the ones, you see them just sort of like lock onto the best guy, the guy that, who's not going to let them down. They can trust, who's, can make these sick plays, and that's Jamar Chase. But yeah, I mean, you can hope it's going to be better just because it's hard to be any worse. But outside of that, I'm not really seeing an angle to get too excited.
Well, I'm going to get more excited than you are on this one, just because of how bad Browning was. I mean,
right.
Scott, you look at 140 passing yards against Minnesota, 125 against Denver, and then
those are great defenses. Joe Flacco is going to get you 165.
Well, I'll take Joe Flacco, the chances of Joe Flacco getting me 200 passing yards. Joe Flacco also, like, Joe Flacco, to me, this move feels like Cincinnati is a team where they're definitely not out of it. And if you look at just the quality of the AFC North right now, Cleveland is completely young.
You know what? This could be a negative, honestly. Hot take. They didn't make this trade after 140 yards against Minnesota. They didn't make this trade after 125 yards against Denver with no turnovers. They made it when he had 251 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns against the Lions, where this game was more competitive than I thought, or Vegas thought it should be, or would be. It was the 4 turnovers. So, maybe they want someone who's more conservative, and this is like actually even worse for the passing game.
I don't know. I'm going to take this as a slight win.
All right, that's a galaxy brain take.
There's a little galaxy brain, a little bit, galaxy brain. Jamar Chase, though, I think we're going to get a little bit more consistency, where we can't expect like the Joe Burrow consistency, but I do think with Flacco, he's going to understand sort of what moves the needle, and a chance to this probably might be the last time you ever see Joe Flacco as a starter for a decent amount of time in the NFL. I think he's going to really, really force feed Jamar Chase. We saw this a few years back when he went to Cleveland. We just saw how he was able to elevate David Njoku. I think he's going to lock on to Chase. Can he elevate potentially a secondary pass catcher, or can Chase Brown managers get sort of a PPR bailout where he ends up with more games where he's catching 5, 6, 7 passes? Maybe. But I think for me, it's a Jamar Chase take. Jamar Chase, we had some worries where it was he's going to put up these 30-point spike weeks and then give you 9 points because of Jake Browning. I think that goes to bed a little bit with Flacco. I also think from an NFL lens, not to get off of fantasy football, the Bengals view themselves as a team who can still win the AFC North. The North is an absolute train wreck division right now with the way Baltimore's falling apart. And I think that there's some pressure on Zach Taylor, where Zach Taylor, I think, needs to not have this thing fall apart, or I think he might lose his job and Cincinnati might move on from him. So I think a lot to unpack there. Very just how weird a trade it was, and sort of out of nowhere. Even though we think we know what's going on, there's always something that sort of keeps you on your toes, like this one. Let's pivot off of the Bengals, Browns talk, the Flacco talk. One thing, a lot of times you write in the Everything Report, and I sort of just agree with everything, and I'm certainly not like nitpicking takes, but one thing that I thought was interesting is you listed Deebo Samuel as a wide receiver 2. We have him on a couple of teams collectively, and Scott, the two of us were definitely higher on Deebo Samuel this summer throughout the podcast process in multiple shows, and like the way we were ranking him, than a lot of other people. A lot of people had Deebo as sort of toast this summer. Deebo's been fantastic. Another huge week for him, 8 catches, 96 yards on 11 targets. He's been rolling. And when we look at Deebo Samuel throughout the season, the stats have just been fantastic. He has 4 games where he has 17 points or more, 3 games of 20 points or more. This is a unbelievable run by Deebo Samuel. And I was a little bit surprised that you're not more on the Deebo is a wide receiver 1 train right now. You sort of said he's going to end up being a wide receiver 2. So I'm splitting hairs here, but I think he's a wide receiver 1 rest of the season.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is, Terry McLaurin. So he had this insane target share week 1 with Jaden Daniels, but Terry McLaurin missed all that time in training camp, maybe a little rusty, and then 55.6% first read target share, third most of any player in any game this season last week. It was a game without Terry McLaurin. So I'm just kind of baking in a little concern that McLaurin comes back. We see the usage volume drop. But yeah, I said, even if McLaurin is back this week, I'm going to rank Deebo as a high-end wide receiver 2. And just looking back across the first 5 weeks of the season, according to Fantasy Wins Above Replacement, which is a free tool on the site, he's the 6th most valuable player, wide receiver right now.
That's a great poll. Highly recommend you check that one out. Let everybody know once again about that because you kind of brushed that through. We didn't cover anything on Fantasy Points data, but the Wins Above Replacement tool, what it can do for you, how managers can use that one.
Yeah, so we have a bunch of free tools on the site, fantasypoints.com. One is Fantasy Points Wins Above Replacement, Fantasy War, which just basically tells you who the most valuable players in fantasy have been. You can look at this for tight end premium leagues, super flex leagues. And so it's sort of, it factors in value above replacement player, but it also factors in, hey, if a guy scores 90 fantasy points in 1 week, that doesn't really, but like 0 the next, the volatility hurts you. If he scored 30, yeah, chances are you're going to win the league. So any points above and beyond that till you get to 90 doesn't really move the needle. We also have our wide receiver versus cornerback table. We do that better than anyone else. Fairly confident to say that. We have our schedule adjusted tool. So fantasy points per game allowed is really good, helpful for setting lineups. This takes it a few steps further, factors in the level of opposition they faced. We have our XFP. So if you want to know who's leading in expected fantasy points, who's due for a regression. So those are some of the tools we have for free on fantasypoints.com.
Yeah, and I think that what's great is, I'm not even going to say the site, but there's a big major site out there that is a worldwide leader in sports, and some people might say that. They have, they're just scoring. I don't know if anybody's used it, not to throw shots, but there's a scoring leaders tool where they just list their stats, and it freezes up all the time. I bounce around it, just as a quick, easy reference. Fantasy Points data is so smooth, and I think if you're considering using something and paying for the subscription, the tools that Scott referenced, it's a great way for you to have an entry level and just see how smooth the navigation is, how easy it is to read everything. So yeah, big shout to the big team over there at Fantasy Points Data. And also what I find amazing is I record Monday morning bright and early our waiver wire show for Fantasy Football Daily with Joe Dolan and Tom Brawley. Everything is already locked in and updated at 6:30, 7 in the morning on Monday mornings, East Coast time. So I'm able to see all of this amazing data when I'm preparing for the show. Those guys they work very, very quickly. So big shout out to that whole team over there. If you want access to it, use the code Theo. Let's talk about the New Orleans Saints pass catchers. You talked about this a little bit in the Everything Report. Your thoughts on what we're seeing out of Shaheed and specifically Chris Olave. Chris Olave seems like a buy right now. Your thoughts on Olave and also Shaheed?
Yeah, absolutely. These are, just about everyone in the Saints, but in particular, Chris Olave ranks top 3 in XFP per game. What is he? Barely a top 24 wide receiver by fantasy points per game. I promise you that is going to regress to the mean. I know this is a really bad quarterback. This isn't a great offense, not a lot of touchdown upside, but I've done this enough to tell you it is going to regress to the mean in a meaningful way. He's not going to fall perfectly in line with his XFP. He'll be a little bit below that, but he is going to be a more valuable player than he's shown us thus far. That's also represented by first read target share. But Rashid Shaheed, he's just going to pop for these ceiling games. Does a little bit better against man coverage. It was a man-heavy matchup last week. Really good deep threat. Oh, you want a hot take from me? I think Rashid Shaheed is a more talented player than Xavier Worthy. I feel really good. No, I'm serious. I feel really good about it. And you know who agrees with me on this? Brett Whitefield. I double check with him. He feels the same way. The dude is fast. He can't track a deep ball. Rashid Shaheed is fast, can track a deep ball. We talked about a bunch of dead offenses, but I think there's some value here.
Yeah, and when it comes to New Orleans, what we've seen from them, it's Kellen Moore is one of the reasons why I sort of trust that things are going to stay sort of at least fantasy viable in certain parts. With Kellen Moore, he's going to run a lot of plays. There's always some Kellen Moore factors that sort of lend themselves to being fantasy friendly. They're really handcuffed by the quarterback quality in New Orleans. But I do think with a lot of the metrics we're seeing on fantasy points data, Olave has got to return some value here. Shaheed versus Worthy. It's just my guy Xavier Worthy is catching strays. We're not even talking about Xavier Worthy, and you got to bring him up. And the guy is a warrior, Scott. He's playing with a shoulder harness. He's powering through. You're going to see better days from Xavier Worthy in the upcoming weeks. That Chiefs offense, we could have talked about
Thornton had 90 yards last week. Xavier Worthy has never hit 90 receiving yards in a regular season game. It's another player who may or may not be better than Xavier Worthy.
Well,
I'm gonna get killed on the Twitter streets if this leaks somehow.
Yeah, make sure and at Scott Barrett when Xavier Worthy has a big one, and he did have 83 yards in week 4. Not quite 90, but he's getting there for sure. Scott, let's pivot over. Let's continue talking about the wide receivers. Any wide receivers?
I see it on the show sheet. But I'm gonna beat you to the punch. I was just looking at Mike Clay's rankings. Mike Clay, not going to tell you what site he's at, but it might be the worldwide leader in sports. My former boss, who's brilliant, I have a ton of respect for. I look at his rankings every week because he's really good. You were going to ask me about Darren Waller, who ranks outside of his top 10 tight ends. You're going to ask me about Mason Taylor, who ranks outside of his top 12 tight ends. And you're going to ask me about Dalton Kincaid, who ranks outside of his top 20 tight ends. Which of those do you think you disagree with the most?
Well, I mean, to rank Darren Waller outside of the top 10 tight ends for this week is ridiculous. And I think Mike Clay might have lost his fastball. I'll say it on the School of Scott podcast right here. I guess, shout out Mike Clay. We'd love to have you on. We'd love to have you on. But Darren Waller, how anybody can rank Darren Waller that low, Darren Waller is the smoke him if you got him in fantasy football right now. Could he implode? Could this be a 6-week sample size? Sure. Darren Waller could completely break down. He's got the injury history. He's older, but we're seeing him being schemed up in this Miami offense. We now have a sample size of what this offense is going to look like without Tyreek Hill. And I think it's going to be a lot of Darren Waller. Darren Waller now has 3 touchdown grabs in a 2-week period. Looks rejuvenated. Scott, you're a Giants fan. This Darren Waller is what you wanted to see.
Yeah. He was my Exodia tight end that year, believe it or not.
And I drafted him. I'll say that there was a ton of really smart FFPC, really, really smart NFFC managers. Nelson Sousa, Chris Vaccaro, Dan Williamson, Abib liked him that year. There was a ton of us who were trying to pack bags of Darren Waller because he had the scenario where, hey, Brian Daboll, he acquired Stefon Diggs, and Diggs had this huge year when he was in Buffalo. This is his Diggs acquisition. There's no wide receiver target competition. Darren Waller's going to get 140 targets. I can remember it. It's painful. And Waller steamed up in all formats, and then it imploded. Now, the Waller you're seeing in Miami looks like the Waller we wanted in New York. It's absolutely wild. He looks like he really, really cares. The guy's filming his rap videos right outside of the stadium in Miami. The vibes are very, very strong with Waller. I think Waller could end up being a top 5 tight end for the rest of the season if he stays healthy. Jonnu Smith did it last year. What is Tua Tagovailoa looking for? This sort of a target. Jonnu was the easy button target last year. Waller, even more so. I think Jaylen Waddle locked in wide receiver 2 rest of the way. We have him on some teams. He looked good. He hit season highs in targets, catches, receiving yardage, scored a touchdown. Waddle looked good. Devon Achane is a locked in mid RB1, maybe higher, who's going to get 6-7 targets every single week. Where did the rest of the targets go? It's Darren Waller. Darren Waller, they're going to use him as much as possible. Not Jake Ferguson, not Trey McBride level target earner, but can he be in that next few guys mix? Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, look at what Jonnu Smith did last year. Like who is Jonnu Smith? Career journeyman, like never did anything. Over his last 8 games last year with Miami, he averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game. He was outscoring Justin Jefferson. So why can't Darren Waller, a guy who's actually, multiple consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, one of the biggest freaks we've ever seen at the position, be a high-end fantasy wide tight end 1. I can see that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Waller right now, the actionable way to play this is go and trade for Darren Waller. He's going to be in the, it's amazing, Scott. Darren Waller is actually going to be in my dynasty market report, which you can read on fantasypoints.com, because I'm just listing a couple of like old, ugly veteran names that you can get for super cheap that might give you viability. But I think when it comes to Waller, I think it's for as long as he holds up, but the marketplace is so dirt cheap. You're Billy Beaning this thing, and you're actually buying some wins here. I had a team that was a Brock Bowers team. I had picked up Darren Waller, and I was aggressive with him on the waiver wire because I didn't have a great tight end 2 situation. Because why on earth would I invest in a tight end 2 when I have Brock Bowers as my tight end? That's sort of the mentality when you're drafting a tight end early like that. I end up getting Waller, and I'm getting like a Brock Bowers like production. So we're all in on Waller. Mason Taylor, that one I can understand Mike Clay being not like over the top with, but I think a lot of times with NFL teams, they're kind of telling us what they are. And when they're being this clear that this guy's usage is ramping up like this, I think it's a thing. They invested a 2nd round pick on Mason Taylor. Mason Taylor was a prospect where you had all these reports heading into the NFL draft that like multiple teams want Mason Taylor early in the 2nd round, like all those slow drip. I think there was a lot of people who like Mason Taylor. Mason Taylor was a very strong prospect coming out of LSU, has strong athletic traits, great draft capital, and there's a complete lack of wide receiver target competition for Mason Taylor besides Garrett Wilson, and Garrett Wilson is already sort of breaking the he's one of the top guys in target share, first read rates. If you go to a fantasy points data, Garrett Wilson is sort of already through the roof. He's already like maximizing his usage. So I think Mason Taylor has the opportunity to be the 2nd leading target earner in New York for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, things look amazing right now, and we've just seen this so many times where, maybe not the, best talent, the most athletic tight end is just like in a great spot where there's, no one else. You have your number 1, you have them, and there's no one else. And so just on sheer target volume alone. And then, this guy's probably pretty talented. This was, I was lower on him, but this was Brett's tight end 3 in the class. So I think, I think you've got a valuable asset right here.
And speaking of valuable assets, Dalton Kincaid. Kincaid is playing well. From a fantasy lens, Kincaid is putting up very strong numbers now. He has 3 weeks, Scott, where he's got 14.8 points or more. One of those other games was a 10-point week. So really it's been pretty strong, consistent scoring based on where you were drafting Kincaid in sort of that tight end 2 range. Had his best game, one of his best games as a pro, against New England. He had 6 catches for 108 receiving yards, 3 touchdown catches on the year. And I think he benefits from wide receivers sort of not separating themselves from the pack. He has 20 catches, Khalil Shakir 22, Keon Coleman 21, but of course, a lot of that was front-loaded. And Kincaid actually leads Buffalo in receiving yardage and in receiving touchdowns right now. What are your thoughts on Dalton Kincaid? 13.3 points per game right now in PPR.
Yeah, that's behind only Jake Ferguson. So he's the tight end 2 by fantasy points per game. And it's like breaking my brain because he ranks only 27th in route share. He's just a part-time player, 55.5% route share, only 16th in target share. So where is this coming from? 2.84 yards per route run. That's behind only JSN, Puka, Diggs, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm gonna resist the urge to call him like a regression candidate. This isn't, we can't count on this. And just say, yeah, dude, like 2.84 yards per route run's crazy. This is clearly Josh Allen's go-to guy. And there's league winning potential if that route share jumps. I don't know that it will, for all the reasons that, shout out Max Toscano, remember the tight ends, talks about. Basically, he's just not good enough as a blocker, that he's like a liability in certain situations. So he's never going to be more than a 60% route share guy. But, if that thesis is wrong, then yeah, like wheels up, because just look at what he's doing on this within this limited part-time role.
Yeah, and I think, we had a number. I mean, we have great guests on School of Scott. We're going to have some cool guests over the second half of the season when we start adding guests back in the mix. But we had Max Toscano on. We also had Andrew Cooper on. And every time Andrew Cooper kind of breaks down tight ends, I think it's a very simplistic formula. We want to draft tight ends who can be the first or second target on their teams. And when it comes to Kincaid, he's right there. This is sort of a dead heat right now. 29 targets for Shakir, 29 targets for Coleman, and 24 targets for Kincaid. Scott, if we review this in 3 weeks, Kincaid could easily be leading Buffalo in targets. So I'm in on it. It's also year 3 for Kincaid. He was a first-round draft pick. When Buffalo drafted him, it seemed like they'd lost to Kansas City in a bunch of playoff games, and they wanted to draft a Travis Kelce. He's not that, but again, he's a guy who I think can really impact fantasy football, certainly over the second half of the season. And I don't think the market has fully shifted with him. The story of tight end in fantasy football has been certainly Tyler Warren, certainly Jake Ferguson. There hasn't been a whole lot of discussion about Dalton Kincaid. I think you can acquire him in multiple formats right now. Maybe give us a DFS play. One guy we didn't cover. Should DFS managers be using Justin Fields this week against the Denver Broncos?
Well, he is off the main slate. But yeah, I would love to play him. He's someone who really struggles against zone coverage, really does a lot better against man coverage. It's when defensive backs have their backs turned to the quarterback, so it's more room to run. Denver plays man at one of the highest rates. DFS. By the way, we are printing in DFS. DFS isn't for everyone because it's typically really hard. This year, we are doing really well. It feels like I've cashed like 95% of my tournaments, and a huge win is, last week we had 2 different subs win at least 90K. But yeah, this week's DFS slate is really going to come down to Matthew Stafford stacks against the Ravens, or it's going to be Dak Prescott against the Panthers. That's my guess, where most of the ownership is probably going towards the Rams, and rightfully so.
Yeah, definitely a fun one. Highly recommend all of our DFS coverage. Highly recommend Scott's DFS podcasts. And again, you can get access to our DFS packages using the code Theo, 15% off. And Scott, you say that again because you sort of just were casually throw out a 90K winner. Not a bad return on investment there.
Yeah, dude, great year for us. Another guy in our betting Discord, just placing anytime touchdown bets based on our projections as won over 25K. And yeah, so now is a great time to upgrade to a premium package. We just lowered the prices. You can use promo code Theo for an extra 15% off. Tom Brawley's on an absolute heater. I think he's up like 24 units.
12 and 1 run from Tom Brawley.
Jeez.
We gave him his props on the waiver wire show. And a lot of that comes from Tom using Chris Weck's projections, which it all ties full circle. That's why the Fantasy Points subscription is just so valuable. I know guys who only subscribe to Fantasy Points because they're sports bettors. Some guys who've said to me, I subscribe to you guys because of the edge I get in sports betting with some of the content you put out, also Fantasy Points data and
we have the
projections.
We have the best projections in the industry right now. We track that. We were second best last year. That was Chris Weck's first year. This year we're best, and that's no surprise. When you have access to the best data, you should have the best projections, and right now we do. So if you're looking for an edge in prop bets, if you're looking at an edge in DFS, or just, crushing your fantasy leagues, making the right start sits, highly recommend Fantasy Points. Really an all-in subscription, but premium works as well.
Yeah, highly recommend a Fantasy Point subscription. Highly recommend, if you're listening to this on a podcast, you come over and subscribe to Fantasy Points YouTube.
Right, if we just did a pitch, people might have just tuned out or just like turned it off, moved to a different podcast. Let's give them something, the people who just stuck around. You are better at this than anyone. I want you to give me some off the cuff players who could get traded before the trade deadline that, might not be on your radar.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily not on your radar, but I do think we're going to have a very active trade deadline. I think that you talked about the sell-off in Baltimore where you're going to start seeing players being traded. I think I'd be surprised at this point if Mark Andrews is not traded. And the market for Mark Andrews will be interesting. Again, it could be a tight end injury that sort of motivates somebody to go get Mark Andrews. Not sure which team he'll end up on. We could probably galaxy our way through that. Another player who would make sense to be traded just based on the youth movement, David Njoku in Cleveland, who looked fantastic against Minnesota, was really, really good. But there was like some steam last year that Njoku might get traded at the deadline. Comes back to Cleveland. We love David Njoku. I think the market for Njoku would be better than the market for Mark Andrews. And there might be some teams out there with a starting tight end that we think is actually pretty decent. And they say David Njoku is a chance for us to upgrade this position or just be in 12 personnel. So I think there'd be a huge market for Njoku. The New York Jets, we mentioned Breece Hall. That would sort of be the biggest domino to fall, where I think a Breece Hall trade, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But I do think that he's way more likely to be traded than Alvin Kamara, where Kamara is another one where people are sort of circling the wagon saying Alvin Kamara could get traded. New Orleans is just a weird organization, though. It sort of feels like Tennessee when Tennessee had Derrick Henry, and we're all like, okay, Derrick Henry's getting traded to Baltimore. Derrick Henry's getting traded to Baltimore. There's all this chatter. Why would anyone hold on to a guy for an extra 8 games of his career when they could actually cash out and get something for a guy that's going to leave in free agency? What kind of moron organization would do that? Well, organizations like Tennessee and New Orleans would do that because of the nostalgia vibe and people showing up to the game in Kamara jerseys and all that kind of stuff. But Alvin Kamara is also getting phased out of the offense. Maybe they're ramping Kendre Miller up to sort of take over. So we mentioned Isaiah Davis. We mentioned Kendre Miller, sort of guys who could end up taking on a really, really strong touch share if there was a trade. After that, I don't really see anybody that's standing out too much. Then you also throw out there's just going to be some teams shopping around. Does the New York Giants try to go and trade for a wide receiver? Slayton's banged up now. They already lost Malik Neighbors. And we have a young quarterback. We want to make sure he's got some weapons there. I think that the shock trade, if there was like a true shock out there, and this one's really galaxy bringing it, it's AJ Brown, who doesn't seem happy. And could this Philadelphia, and is the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles team, Scott, we're going like super, this is like a bonus for guys who stick around. Never log off a School of Scott, guys. Listen to the end. Right. The 2025 Philadelphia Eagles feel like the 2023 Philadelphia Eagles, where everything could fall apart and they could lose like not a lot of games, but they could lose they could go 4-3 over their next 7. Like that Denver game, there was a lot of like kind of left you kind of sick to your stomach feeling about that, giving up that lead. So I know Philadelphia, there's still a lot of talent there, but I could see things just going south and them sort of having a clean break. That would be the one where I'd put like maybe a 15%, 10% chance it happens on the trade. All the other guys I mentioned, I think that there's a reasonable scenario where they could be moved.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
There you go. There you go. That's why you stick around at the School of Scott podcast. Make sure you check out Fantasy Football Daily, my start sit show with Graham Barfield. We've been really strong on that one. Waiver Wire show, Joe Dolan, Tom Brawley, and myself every week. My recap show with my takeaways that drops every single Monday. And then I have a guest show. Matt Waldman was my guest this week. Scott Barrett was my guest last week, along with Graham Barfield and Ryan Heath. So we're bringing in really high-quality guests on Fantasy Football Daily. Make sure you're tuned into Dynasty Life. Make sure you're tuned into everything we're putting out. The best podcast network anywhere in fantasy, the best YouTube channel anywhere in fantasy. We're everywhere at Fantasy Points. We're going to help you crush your fantasy leagues this season.